Close your eyes and imagine yourself on an autumn day in the 1970s. In your pocket, you have £1 sterling. The crisp texture of the green note feels like real treasure in your hand. This isn't just money. This is magic. This is power. This is the treasure you've acquired by saving pocket money for months, collecting 10 to 20 pence each week. As you pass the bakery window, you smell fresh bread and hot pies, while in the corner, toy shop's display window, brightly packaged Matchbox cars dazzle your eyes. This topic is like a ticket to a time machine. For the elderly, this ticket takes them back to their childhood, while for the young, it's a window into their parents' world. In the 1970s, £1, equivalent to about 15 to 20 pounds today, meant wealth for a child. But these numbers mean nothing to you, do they? Let's see what you could actually buy back then. For just 99 pence, a Luke Skywalker figure from Star Wars. For 25 pence, a Beano comic. For 15 pence, a giant curly-whirly chocolate bar. And you'd still have money left in your pocket. Each Matchbox car was 35 to 40 pence. And with £1, you could buy 2 toys, a comic, and sweets. This was a value today's generation will never experience. Not money, but the key to a world of dreams. Now think for a moment. If you gave a child £20 today, what could they buy? Maybe one small toy, maybe a fast food meal, and that's it. But in the 1970s, with £1, you could provide entertainment for an entire day. This isn't just about inflation. This is about a completely different understanding of lifestyle, values, and childhood happiness. Back then, children knew the value of money because it was difficult to earn. Every Saturday morning, the 10 to 20 pence pocket money received from mother and father was a treasure. You would put this money in your piggy bank, saving for weeks, sometimes months, because you knew that the day you collected £1, you would be a little king. That day, as you passed the bakery, the smell reminded you that you were hungry, and the pound in your hand gave you the power to decide, what should I buy today? A toy or something tasty? This simple question actually reflected the entire essence of that era's child economy. The art of creating infinite happiness with limited resources. Imagine, you're going to the shop, you have £1 in your hand, and you have choices before you. On the left side, the toy shelf, a shiny red Matchbox Ferrari, a blue Corgi car, an Airfix model airplane set in a plastic box. On the right side, the sweet shelf, Mars bars, sherbet dip, blackjack chewing gums, refreshers candies. In the middle, the magazine stand, Beano, Dandy, Whizzer, and Chips, each with colorful comics and secret gifts inside. And you stand there, £1 in your hand, your brain calculating, if I buy a Matchbox car for 40 pence, with the remaining 60 pence I can buy 2 comics and a chocolate. But if I don't buy a toy this week, and add another 70 pence next week, I can buy a big Action Man figure. This was the supreme school of child finance. No bank manager, no economist planned their budget this carefully. Because every penny mattered, every choice required a sacrifice. In 1977, after the Star Wars film hit the screens, those figures became as valuable as gold among children. Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Princess Leia, each 99 pence. And if you had £1 in your hand, you could only buy one figure with 1 penny left over. But that one figure, it wasn't just a plastic toy. It was your hero, your friend, the participant in the space adventures you dreamed about at night. On the way home from the shop, you didn't take it out of its box, you held it carefully because it was precious. Not just the pound, but also the patience and desire you spent collecting that pound. Every child who lived through that era remembers this feeling. The weight of that coin in their hand, the importance of that decision, the joy of that purchase. It wasn't about materialism, it was about achievement, about setting a goal and reaching it through perseverance and sacrifice. Matchbox cars were the gateway to another world. In the 1970s, these small metal toys had to be in every child's collection. A Matchbox car was 35 to 40 pence, and when each new model arrived in shops, children would queue up. Imagine, with £1 you could buy 2 cars and still have 20 to 30 pence left over. With that money, you could buy a pack of refreshers or a small Milky Way chocolate. And then, when you returned home, you would build your own little city on the floor. Garages from cardboard boxes, road bridges from books, and those 2 new cars were the newest additions to your transport empire. The beauty of these toys was in their simplicity and durability. They were made of die-cast metal, heavy and solid, built to last. You could drop them, crash them, leave them outside in the rain, and they would still work. There were no batteries to replace, no electronic parts to break, no software updates required. They were pure, simple toys that relied entirely on your imagination to bring them to life. And because you had saved for so long to buy them, you treasured them. You knew the name of every car in your collection. You remembered exactly where and when you bought each one, and you could spend hours creating elaborate scenarios and races with them. Comics were another great entertainment of that era. A Beano comic was 25 pence, and inside there weren't just comics, but also competitions, puzzles, and sometimes small plastic gifts. Dandy was 20 pence, Ornetimut. Whizzer and Chips was 22 pence. Every Friday, new issues came out, and you would swap comics with your friends. With £1, you could buy 4 comics, and that was almost a month's worth of reading material. Each comic wasn't just entertainment, but also an investment. After reading, you would sell or swap it with your friend. So those 25 pence created lifelong memories. The comics of that era had a special quality that modern children's entertainment lacks. They were printed on cheap paper. The colors were basic. The stories were simple. But they sparked imagination in a way that high-definition screens cannot. You would read each issue multiple times, memorizing your favorite strips, copying the drawing styles, creating your own characters and stories. The physical nature of comics made them social objects. You would trade them in the playground, discuss the stories with friends, collect specific issues to complete story arcs. They were tangible pieces of culture that passed from hand to hand, accumulating value not in monetary terms but in the shared experiences they created. The world of sweets is an entirely separate conversation topic. In the 1970s, with £1 you could stock up on sweets for an entire week. A Mars bar was 8 pence, a Milky Way 6 pence, a Curly Whirly, that long, twisty caramel chocolate, was 15 pence. Sherbet dip, that sugary powder in a yellow packet with the candy stick you used to eat it, was just 10 pence. Blackjack and fruit salad chewing gums were half a penny each, meaning 2 gums for 1 penny. Calculate, with £1 or 100 pence, you could buy 2 Mars bars for 16 pence, 1 Curly Whirly for 15 pence, 2 sherbet dips for 20 pence, 1 pack of refreshers for 10 pence, 10 blackjack gums for 5 pence, and you'd still have 34 pence left in your pocket. But the most interesting thing wasn't this. The most interesting thing was that you didn't eat these sweets alone. You would share them with friends, trade them in the schoolyard, sometimes sell them. You'd trade 1 Mars bar for 5 blackjack gums, then trade those gums for another toy. This was a small economic system, and every child developed their own trading strategy. Some children became sweet barons, others became toy collectors. But everyone's starting capital was the same. A humble £1. The sweet shops of that era were magical places, different from today's sterile supermarket aisles. They were small, often family-run establishments where the owner knew every child by name. The sweets were displayed in large glass jars on high shelves, and you had to ask the shopkeeper to reach them down. There was a ritual to buying sweets. You would point to what you wanted, the shopkeeper would weigh it on scales, pour it into a small paper bag, twist the top, and hand it to you with a smile. The whole process made the purchase feel special and ceremonial. And because you were spending your own saved money, you chose carefully. You would stand there, doing mental arithmetic, trying to maximize your purchase, asking yourself whether 10 small cheap sweets were better than 2 expensive chocolate bars. This wasn't just shopping. It was mathematics, economics, and decision-making training disguised as childhood fun. Today's children, who can ask their parents to add items to an online shopping cart with a single click, miss out on this valuable life lesson about choice, consequence, and the true value of money. Now let's look at the mathematics for a moment. In the 1970s, the average salary was approximately £30 to £40. Today, the average salary in Great Britain is approximately £2,500. This means an increase of about 60 to 80 times. But if a Matchbox car was 35 pence in 1970, today, the same type of small toy car is £3 to £5, meaning an increase of only about 10 times. A Mars bar went from 8 pence to about 80 pence today, again about 10 times. But salaries increased 60 to 80 times. What does this mean? This means that, relatively speaking, that £1 in those days was more valuable than 10 to 15 pounds today. Or rather, that £1 in those days could bring you more happiness. Because the issue isn't just in the numbers, the issue is in the simplicity and accessibility of everything in that era. Back then, toys were simple: metal cars, plastic figures, cardboard comics. They weren't electronic, didn't require batteries, didn't need internet connection. They were physical, tangible, and most importantly, they freed your imagination. A Matchbox car in your hand could be a Ferrari winning first place in Italian races, or a police car chasing criminals on New York streets. A Luke Skywalker figure could enter an epic battle with Darth Vader on the floor, or discover a new civilization on the universe's most remote planet. Today, children have smartphones in their hands, tablets, game consoles worth hundreds of pounds. But they don't have something we had back then in our hands: the ability to create infinite worlds with limited resources. Because if you only have £1 and you buy a toy, you must make maximum use of that toy. You protect it, you play with it creatively, you treat it like treasure. Today, if you buy a child a £50 toy, they might play with it for a week and forget it. But in the 1970s, a toy bought for 99 pence remained in memories for years. The psychological research on this phenomenon is fascinating. Studies have shown that children who have fewer toys actually play more creatively and develop better problem-solving skills. When you have one Matchbox car instead of 50, you invest that car with more meaning, create more elaborate stories around it, and extract more value from it. The scarcity itself becomes a driver of creativity. Modern children, overwhelmed with options and instant gratification, often experience what psychologists call choice paralysis, having so many options that they struggle to engage deeply with any single one. The children of the 1970s, with their limited resources and simple toys, were forced to dig deeper into their imaginations, and in doing so, they developed cognitive and creative skills that served them throughout their lives. And then there were the piggy banks. Every child had their own piggy bank. Some had metal pig-shaped piggy banks, some had simple glass jars, others had cash boxes made from old tea tins. Every Saturday, you would put those 10 to 20 pence in the piggy bank, and the sound of metal touching metal, clink, was music to your ears. As weeks passed, the piggy bank got heavier, and when you shook it, the sound of the coins inside was a growing symphony. And finally, the awaited day would come. You would open the piggy bank and start counting the coins. 10 pence, 20 pence, 50 pence, 80 pence, 90 pence, and finally, £1. That moment of triumph, that feeling of reaching your goal, this was an experience that no modern mobile game could provide. The piggy bank was more than just a container for money. It was a physical manifestation of your growing achievement. Every coin you dropped in represented a week of patience, a decision not to spend immediately, a commitment to a future goal. This taught delayed gratification, one of the most important life skills that predicts success in adulthood. Studies like the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment have shown that children who can delay gratification tend to have better life outcomes. The children of the 1970s, forced by economic reality to save for weeks or months to afford a desired toy, were receiving unconscious training in this crucial skill. Then the journey to the shop would begin, maybe on foot, maybe by bicycle, maybe with your parents. But on that journey, your brain worked non-stop. What should I buy? This time a toy or sweets, maybe a comic. But this week, a new Action Man figure came out. Maybe I should buy it? But that's £1.50. I still don't have 50 pence. This internal dialogue, this decision-making process, was a ritual that every child of that era went through. And when you reached the shop, you would stand in front of the display and review all the choices again. The shop owner would wait patiently, because they knew that for a child, spending £1 was a serious decision. The shop owners of that era played an important role in children's lives. They weren't just retailers, they were mentors, confidants, and sometimes friends. A good shop owner would remember what you had been saving for, would put aside a special item if they knew you were close to having enough money, would offer advice on which toys were the best value. There was a human element to commerce that has been lost in our age of self-service checkouts and online shopping. The shop owner might ask, "Have you been saving long for this?" And when you proudly said, 3 months, they would nod approvingly, recognizing your achievement. This social validation made the purchase even more meaningful. And finally, you would make your choice. You would take the toy in your hand, give the money to the shopkeeper, and they would return your change. That 1 pence or 5 pence that remained would be the first contribution to the next piggy bank. And then, the journey home. That journey was completely different from the journey there. Now you had something in your hand that you bought with your own money. You wouldn't take it out of the bag. You'd look at it through the box. You'd smile. As soon as you got home, you'd call your friends and show them your new toy. And then the play would begin. Games that continued for hours, days, weeks. This experience, saving £1, making decisions, buying, valuing, taught us life lessons. We learned that money doesn't come easily, so it must be spent wisely. We learned that sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes you have to sacrifice. Sometimes you have to share with friends. We learned that happiness isn't always in expensive things. Sometimes it can be in a small 99-pence toy. These lessons are much more difficult for children to obtain today because the modern world offers them everything immediately. Online shopping, card payments, ordering with one click, all of this removes that physical, emotional, educational process. The children of the 1970s are now 50 to 60 years old. They tell these stories to their children and grandchildren, and young people often don't believe, "Really? You could buy that much with £1?" Yes, you could. And that era is remembered not only for cheap prices, but also for the values of that time, the simplicity and the genuine nature of childhood happiness. Today we look back and say, the past was better. But actually, we're not just remembering the past. We're nostalgically recalling the lifestyle of that era, that unconscious happiness, those small, magical moments. £1 wasn't just a monetary unit back then. It was hope. It was dream. It was the key to a world of possibilities. The economic historians who study this period note something fascinating. Despite having less material wealth, people in the 1970s reported similar or sometimes higher levels of life satisfaction compared to people today. This paradox has been called the happiness income puzzle. Beyond a certain threshold of basic needs being met, additional wealth doesn't necessarily create additional happiness. The children of the 1970s, with their £1 budgets and simple toys, may have actually experienced more genuine joy than modern children surrounded by expensive gadgets and endless entertainment options. There's also something to be said about the communal nature of childhood in the 1970s. Because children had fewer toys and less money, they were forced to interact with each other more. You couldn't sit in your room playing video games online with strangers. You had to go outside, find your friends, and negotiate what to play with your limited resources. If one child had a football, another had a cricket bat, and a third had some chalk to draw on the pavement, you could create an entire afternoon of entertainment. This social interaction, this negotiation, this cooperative play, developed social skills in a way that modern solitary digital entertainment cannot match. The children of the 1970s learned to share, to take turns, to resolve conflicts, to empathize with others, all because scarcity forced them to cooperate, rather than retreat into individual bubbles of entertainment. Many psychologists and educators today are concerned about the social skill deficits they see in young people who have grown up with smartphones and social media rather than face-to-face play. The children of the 1970s, for all their lack of technology, may have been better prepared for the social demands of adult life. The environmental aspect is worth considering too. The toys of the 1970s were built to last. A Matchbox car was made of metal and could survive decades of play. Many adults today still have their childhood Matchbox collections, and these toys are now valuable collectibles. In contrast, many modern toys are made of cheap plastic, designed almost to be disposable, lasting perhaps a few months before breaking and being thrown away. This disposable culture creates environmental problems, but also teaches children that things are temporary and replaceable rather than permanent and precious. The child of the 1970s who saved for months for a single toy and then treasured it for years learned a very different lesson about material goods than the modern child whose toy box is constantly being refilled with new, cheap, breakable items. There's an argument to be made that the enforced frugality of the 1970s was actually teaching children more sustainable attitudes towards consumption, attitudes that our current environmental crisis desperately needs us to rediscover. If you lived through that era, reading this story, you probably have a small smile in your heart and slight moisture in your eyes, because you remember too that piggy bank, that shop, those choices, and most importantly, those endlessly beautiful childhood days. You remember the weight of those coins in your hand, the smell of that sweet shop, the feeling of the cardboard comic in your fingers, the excitement of opening a new toy on Christmas morning, knowing how much sacrifice and saving went into buying it. You remember the summer afternoons that seemed to last forever, playing with toys that cost almost nothing but provided boundless entertainment. You remember the friendships formed over shared comics and toy swaps, the negotiations in the playground, the intense discussions about which superhero was the best or which sweet was worth the most. These memories aren't just nostalgia for the past. They're memories of a time when life was simpler, when happiness was more accessible, when childhood was protected from the constant bombardment of marketing and digital stimulation that defines modern youth. The £1 of the 1970s wasn't just currency. It was a ticket to imagination, a symbol of achievement, and a teacher of life's most important lessons about patience, value, and joy. And perhaps that's the real magic. Not what you could buy with that £1, but what that £1 taught you about life, happiness, and what really matters. In our modern world of instant gratification and unlimited choice, maybe we've lost something precious that children of the 1970s took for granted. The understanding that having less can sometimes mean appreciating more, that waiting for something makes it sweeter, and that the simple pleasures, a small toy, a comic book, a piece of candy bought with your own saved money, can bring a depth of joy that no amount of wealth can buy. That's the true magical power of £1 in the 1970s, and it's a magic worth remembering.